All right, welcome back to the third tutorial.
Thank you. And okay, so let's recall what we did last time. Ah, I know. No. Okay, so let's recall what we did last time. So we talked about the Bukowski-Lemoine theorem, which is that um, essentially the generic weather forcing can be obtained by taking an iterated root power. We get those finite iterations from n, there's something m omega, and p is exactly what's missing from m omega in order to restore all the intersection of the mn's. We can move things between v and m omega of p. We are going to do that in a more sophisticated way in this talk. And this is the picture that we would like to have in mind. V, or actually each one of them ends, carries an elementary embedding from V to an omega, and omega is a subclass of M omega of P, which is in turn a subclass of V. And this is how we're going to sort of move elements from M omega P to V and backwards. And we talked about the standard-based pre-forcing or the intellectual collapse case in which we had to add some generic filter from V, but in those cases, what we did is adding the relatively simple one. So in the standard-based pre-forcing, we had to add something which looks like a pre-forcing, and in the intermediate collapse, we had to add the first collapse. But other than that, the same phenomenon still holds. Also, we would still have this intersection of some models mn of hn. Each one of them is the natural model in which we can compute the rest of the iteration, and the intersection is exactly the model which is obtained by adding a generic object to M omega. This thing sort of suggests that we're doing the right thing. So this object G is capture exactly the same information as its approximations Hn to some extent. We're not doing something too weak or something too strong. We're doing exactly the right. This makes the forcing natural to some extent. Okay, the next result that I would like to talk about is related to stationary reflection. So let's call the definition. If we have a stationary subset of some lambda, typically a regular cardinal of 30, we say that it reflects at an ordinal alpha, and we think that alpha is a countable proportionality if the intersection of S with alpha is also stationary. We write the statement reflection of S means every stationary subset of F reflects. And this is those of many of you who are working on those things would know that typically we are going to add like this one more parameter to this statement, but this is what we do. The amount of steps that you can reflect simultaneously, where we are going to reflect, how often. Okay, so the form that I would like to talk about is the foreign consistency statement. So start with a measurable cardinal, and let's say GCH, and assume that we already have some significant amount of reflection. So every stationary subset of kappa plus that consists of ordinals of proportionality less than kappa already reflects. And we also need to assume, slightly technical assumption, that this reflection is preserved under adding a Cohen subset of kappa plus. This is pretty harmless, but we will need it. It could be a paradigm. And then by actually doing a forcing which is equivalent to the Cohen forcing over kappa plus, we can construct a model. This is not a generic extension by the Cohen forcing, but a different one. It's going to be some iterated root of our standard-based sampling. And this model is going to be a model of a stationary reflection for a successor of a singular. Okay, so what kind of models for stationary reflection is successor of a singular cardinal there are? We know of. So it starts with a model obtained by Menachem Bidor in 70s, starting with an omega sequence of supercopper cardinals, or even foreign copper cardinals. In this model, the successor of the limit is going to have full reflection. Every stationary set is going to reflect. The assumption is pretty strong. Assume that infinitely many supercompound cardinals. This is a very strong assumption, and the stationary reflection should not cost that much. So yeah, so what happens if we just start with kappa, which is just kappa plus superconductor? This is already enough in order to get this is already enough in order to get the reflection, but only for a set of ordinals that consist of low coffinalities below kappa, because the set of all ordinals with coffinality kappa below kappa plus cannot reflect. This is always true because kappa is regular. So in even starting with this much lower assumption, just the assumption of kappa being kappa plus superconduct, we have almost full reflection. We can ask what happens if we just singularize kappa. Can we somehow get rid of this bad stationary set, a set of ordinals of coffinality kappa below kappa plus? And it took a while to get rid of it, because if we just try to do it naively, we just try to shoot a cloudy joint from it, we might just add a new non-reflecting stationary set, and we would have no control over that. And then we would have to do some kind of iteration, and things just don't quite work. Another small remark, in this theorem, we can get lambda to be alpha omega. We need to add a pretty harmless assumption of a perturbation in order for all those elements to work. And we need to add the generic filter for the interrelated collapse. So as we know, this is the first collapse. The collapse is in omega 1 and the first critical point kappa. Okay. How do we prove such a theorem? Okay, so as I said, we have a band stationary set of all ordinals of coffinality kappa below kappa plus. It's non-reflecting stationary set. Being non-reflecting is upward absolute, but being stationary is not. So we have a chance. We need to kill it. We need to shoot a cloudy joint from this set. But we don't quite want to do this over V. So what are we going to do? We are going to take an iterated proof of power using a normal filter on power, and we look at M omega. And the image of the set inside M omega is a non-stationary subset of V. Well, it is obviously stationary in M omega, but in this it's non-stationary. Why? This is quite easy, because if we just look at the point weight image of the ordinal kappa plus, and we look at the accumulation points of that, this is a club in V at J omega of kappa plus because of continuity. But every ordinal pair has coffinality at most kappa in M omega. Okay? This is if the coffinality is strictly less than kappa, we can move the witnessing from V to M omega below the critical point. And if the coffinality is exactly kappa, then we try to move the witness from V to M omega, and then the witness stretch, and then we just copy them again. To right. So V knows that V is non-stationary, and we want to sort of pass this information into M omega. How are we going to do that? Okay, let's look at the first thing Q defined in M omega of P, with the genetic extension of M omega by the Lucretian sequence. Trying to add a closed and bounded subset of from this transform. Okay. This Q is okay. I have to say that this stationary set is also stationary in this set B is also stationary in M omega of P. Okay. Now I have to admit that here there is a real advantage for the forcing approach onto the iterated Usopp approach, because if you want to prove it in the forcing approach, you just say the predictive forcing is kappa plus this with the stationary set. If you want to do this in the iterated Usopp approach, it's much more messier. Great. So now
you're working just with standard CP forcing.
Yes. So far, I'm just doing standard technical. So P is just a sequence of critical points of the iteration. The iteration is using the normal measure that I have on kappa. I need to assume, in order to get the next lemma, that 2 to the kappa is kappa. I need to assume some instance of GCH. Why? Okay. So let's look at this Q. And it's from the perspective of M omega P. So M omega of P is closed under kappa sequences. It's the intersection of models closed under kappa sequences. Okay, so this is really kappa. This is really kappa. And here is the main trick. We look at Q from V. And from the point of view of V, Q is the forcing of size 2 to the kappa, size of J omega of kappa. And it is kappa plus closed, or at least contains the dense set which is kappa plus closed. Why? What is this set? So this set is going to be the collection of all conditions with maximal element in D. The dense set, not available to M omega of P, but certainly available to P. And it is kappa closed. This is using the fact that M omega of P itself is closed under kappa sequence. So if we take an increasing sequence of conditions in this set, we can glue them together inside M omega of increasing. Okay. So far, what are we planning to do with this kind of? So we want to force the generic over a V generic for Q. But we want to be very careful. We want to be able to do that, to add this generic to M omega of P while preserving the Olbukhovsky-Dolomov phenomenon. So this is going to be the next step, and this is slightly important. So what we need to do, we need to be able to push the generic H through J omega, going all the way through to M omega. But then we're getting something which is very certainly not H, it's something which also from the perspective of M omega looks like a quant forcing. So we need to do this in a slightly more delicate way, we need to split H. So what do I mean by that? So here is a general lemma due to Woodin and appears in a paper of Cummings and when he attributed to Woodin. So it goes like, let's say that you have an ultra power node using a normal measure on cardinal kappa, J from V to N. And we take some nice forcing in MB, which is kappa plus close, and we force over V using V. We take a V generic for forcing in M. Okay. Then, what do we know? So, since V is kappa plus closed in M, it is certainly kappa plus closed in V, it is kappa plus distributed. So, J is going to lift after forcing with H, and we have a unique filter that can be the J of H, which is the filter generated by the point-based image of J on H. This is also something that we did last time.
But when you say generate an M generic filter, for which portion? For J of B?
And this is for J of B, exactly. This is no longer for B, this is for J of B. And now okay, so we have this filter HT. This is an M generic filter for J of B. What is the connection between HT and H? Because H also makes sense as a generic filter for B over N. They are mutually generic. So H tilde and H are generic for the product of JB times B. Okay, and this is a very non-trivial lemma. I mean, once you know that it is true, you can prove it. But knowing that it is true is quite surprising. So what you just get here is that it's not only that J lifts under kappa plus distributive forcing, or this is the slightly stronger case that, of kappa plus closed forcing, and it produces a mutually generic filter for whatever you got before. So J allows you to split the filter H into two mutually generic filters, H and HQ. In our case, we are going to apply to Q, and our J's are going to be something like the J and M, the embedding between the MNs and MNs.
So mutually generic over M.
Over M, yes, over M. Thank you. Yes. H tilde and H are mutually generic over M, not over V, because V knows about J. So we know that there is a connection between H and H tilde. They can compute one from another. But H, in some sense, cannot know enough about J in order to be able to see any connection between H and H. Okay. We are going to apply it on H, which is a V generic for Q, and we are going to apply it for J, which is well, we're going to apply it iteratively, but eventually for J, which are something like J and N. Note that J and M keeps Q in place. J and M of Q is Q, because Q is definable using objects which are fixed under those embeddings. Great. Now let's define a sequence of filters by splitting H again and again and again and again. So H of N is going to be the following finite sequence of filters. We are just going to look at H, and we are going to move it through J, K, N for every possible K below N. This is going to be a generic filter over M, N, of N plus 1 copies of Q. H omega is going to be obtained by pushing all the H's all the way through to M omega. H omega is no longer something like an omega product of Q's. This is not, I mean, H omega is not a generic filter for an infinite product of the images of Q. This is no longer true. H omega is going to be a generic for simplified forcing. Now let's see. N together with the Hn is simply an extension of Mn by forcing isomorphic to, maybe it's better to write here, add kappa n plus 1, because each one of those filters is equivalent over Mn to a generic filter for the coin-forcing over kappa n plus. And we are just taking a product vector, mutually generic. So when we add Hn to Mn, we're just doing a coin-forcing over Mn. Particularly, I want to preserve a lot of good properties. Second thing, essentially a consequence of the first part, is that J and omega lifts. J and omega lifts to embedding from MNHN to an initial segment, and omega to go between initial segment of the H omega, not the whole H omega, but an initial segment of it, the first n plus 1 coordinates. And again, this is quite easy. We just need to ask what is going to happen to each coordinate in Hn once we apply J and omega on it. And we know that since this is a kappa plus with primitive forcing, this is the only thing that we can do. So we are going to have elementary embedding between M and H and a sub-model of our final model, which is going to be M omega H omega, which is exactly what we need. It means that we are going to have the Minkowski-Donovan theorem on those models. The intersection of the M and Hn is exactly M omega. Well, we don't quite need phi, but I made it anyway. It is definable from H omega. And M omega of phi and H omega. Okay, and here is a little miracle. So it means that H itself is fair. Now this is quite far from being obvious. H is not a member of the sequence H omega. It is a member of each one of the Hn. Okay? H is a generic, from the perspective of M omega, it is a generic for forcing killing a stationary set. But each one of the coordinates in H omega is a generic for the coin force. But the Minkowski-Donovan theorem says that H somehow appeared in this model. And actually, it tells us exactly how it appeared. If we look at the proof, we can see exactly how to reconstruct H given H omega. We are going to do this back and forth. Pull those, we pull H backwards and then push it to M omega and H. Omega is going to give us exactly what we need. Okay, very nice. Now let's look what happens in this model, M omega P and H omega. I want to claim that we have full stationary reflection, therefore kappa omega. Let's take a set disjoint from B, because as I said, H is first. So if we have a stationary set, if our loss of generality, it's not intersecting with set V, which is all the ordinals that have previous copinality kappa. And again, we repeat the same argument as the Minkowski-Donovan theorem. So we say pull those S backwards to Mn, Mn actually. Okay. And then we ask the following question: is it true that the Sn, all the ordinals that are going to go to S, is it a stationary set? If it's stationary, yeah, you get right. If it's stationary, then it reflects. And if it reflects, then S itself reflects. So this is not very difficult to see. It reflects some ordinal flow penalty, and then we can just push this ordinal all the way through to M omega and get the same reflection to hold in M omega. Okay, so otherwise it's non-stationary. Okay, so we have some witness for that. Some C and some club. Now we can push those clubs, and this is very important that we can actually do that. So each one of the clubs is a member of M and H, and there is an elementary embedding J and omega star from M and H, and to a submodel of M omega H omega, we can push it. Each one of the class J and omega Cn is fair. The sequence is fair because it is closed under omega sequences. The intersection is very, it is a class. And it is joined from X to Y. Well, if there were let's say that there is some ordinal alpha, which is in the intersection of all the class and also in N, then its preimage has to be in some of the SNs, and then we just compare it to whatever we have in Cn, and we get a contradiction. Yeah. So again, and this concludes the proof. So what we got is a model them over the P and this H, this real sequence of point generic H. And we in this figure we sort of simultaneously already kill all the non-reflective stationary sets, and this is an iteration-free proof. We didn't need, after we killed the obvious bad stationary set, we didn't need to keep iterating, killing new non-stationary set, non-reflective stationary sets that were generated somehow. This is not what happened. Okay.
Can you now tell us what is the forcing over M omega to get this form?
Yeah, so yeah, or maybe even want to ask, is the forcing over V that that P and H omega is the generic for the J omega image? Okay, right? So it is true. It's and you can obtain such a forcing. Now, how are we going to do it? So you want to consider how you pass from MNHN to MN plus 1 HN plus 1. So maybe I should please try. I won't tell all the details, but I will try to give some intuition. So what happens when you move from HN, tension from HN to HN plus 1? So you're pushing all the first coordinates by the embedding, which is the autopower embedding. And the last coordinate is sort of an inverse of the autopower embedding. So what does it mean? It means that in the last coordinate, you should be able to start with a representative for a condition that should be in the last coordinate of HN and pick a critical point from it. So we are going to get some kind of a tree splitting on a large set. Each one of the nodes carries an information that should be the initial part of the HN, and they have correspondence in the sense that the next coordinate consists the successors of a node represent current node. So it was obviously not very clear, but there is such a forcing, and it's not very unnatural to obtain. Okay, let me say very briefly a few words about Sharon's factor and the sigma prefix project, because I want to say to get to it. So in Sharon's PhD thesis, he constructed a model of pair of SVH together with stationary reflection. And he did it in a very different way from what I discovered here. So he started with long extender forcing, whatever this means, and over this model, he could prove that there is a non-reflecting stationary set, and then he obtained a very sophisticated forcing in order to kill it. It's certainly not a standard one, killing the stationary set using bounded approximations, because this one would it would kill the witness for failure of SCH. It was something that was more precisely plugged into the original prototype forcing, combined together. So the right way to think about it is as some function that given a prototype forcing of certain nice properties and a name for non-reflecting stationary set gives us a new prototype forcing that also that projects to the old one and kills the non-reflecting stationary set. And there is the main concept, there is the concept of Quadrat set, and the concept of Quadrat set looks very, very connected to the assumption in the proof that I just showed that Sn is non-stationary. Okay? It's very but in Sharon's case, he had to do the iteration. This is the main complexity here. Okay. Is that Sharon's idea was generalized or made abstract by the Sigma Freaky group, the Alexandre Porvet, the Dino Porvet, and the Saprinov, in which they show that you can take a rather abstract approach to those things. You can define what is a Sigma Freaky forcing. It's essentially prototype forcing, but with some assumption about the ordering that would make it useful. And on those very wide class of forcings, they could define the Sharon Spanto and they could iterate it. So they show that in general, there is a wide variety of prototype forcing that you can do, and then you can iterate in order to get payload of station, in order to get the stationary. And you can start with something valid in SPH and keep this case. But there are some limitations. You cannot get more than that too, and there are some other limitations. The iteration itself is not, no, the iteration itself is quite complex. And here's the question, can you actually obtain, so is the proof that I just showed very restricted? Is it just applicable for the prototype forcing, the vanilla one? Or can you do it in something like the Node standard prototype forcing, in which you actually have a rather non-trivial non-reflecting stationary set? So at least in the standard-based prototype forcing, like the one that I showed last time, you can do it. But in general, it is really unclear. So it might be that the method that I just showed cannot reach the full potential of the Sigma prefix. Maybe there are prototype forcing in which you actually have to iterate. Okay. Let me say a very few words about the uncountable finality case. Okay. So let's try to change the cofinality of regular cardinal couplet to be some uncountable cardinal below couplet. And you want to do this in the same way that we did before. Let's do this, let's try. So we can try to take a longer iteration, right? We aim, you know, we are aiming to get a cofinal sequence in the image of kappa, and this cofinal sequence should witness the fact that kappa is singular, but have an uncountable cofinality, so it can be an omega sequence, it has to be a longer one. But when we do that, let's do our nice iteration, we iterate the same measure again and again, and we hit the omega point, and then we want to say, okay, let's try to hit something again, and eventually we're going to have the sequence of critical points in our model, and it's easy to see that this means that we actually reconstructed the j omega of the measure u that we heated through the way. So what does it mean? It means that in the omega point of the iteration, we had to hit a measure that contains j omega of u in its root of power. This is the Mitchell order. So it means that when we did the iteration, we did, let's say, omega many times some measure u, and then at the omega point, we had to hit a measure which is strictly larger in the Mitchell order than j omega of u, because it contains it in its root component. Okay? So this means that naturally, if we just repeat this line of work, we have to start with something like that. We have to start with a sequence of measures increasing the Mitchell order for u alpha, then it's necessary. Even, I mean, we know that it's probably necessary by the work of the inner model theory, but here I'm saying it is necessary in order to get the approach you want. So, weaker sense of necessity. Okay, so let's start with the case that mu is less than kappa. And we're going to define an iteration, and what we just said actually determines how we are going to iterate it. So at each point we are going to hit the measure u of index gamma alpha, and this is the least index for which we didn't hit this index unboundedly many times below alpha. There is no final subset of ordinal beta less than alpha such that gamma beta is gamma alpha. So it looks like this. For all the natural numbers, we're just going to take the 0th measure, and then at omega, we're going to take the 1st measure, and then at omega plus 1, we're going to return to 0. And in general, if we, read the typo here, but given the normal control form of an ordinal, we can compute which type of index you're going to hit at each point, at least when we are below overlapping good. And we have an intersection theorem here. Let's prove it down one. And note a slight difference here. In order for it to make sense, we have to add to M alpha the initial frequency sequence. Now this is necessary, right? When we go to even alpha equals omega, M omega is no longer closed under omega sequence. And eventually we are going to have the initial segment P up to omega, for omega many elements in our model. So if you want the intersection theorem to be true, we have to add it. And by sort of induction and hypothesis, we know that once we add it, we add everything that we need. Okay. And like before, really similarly, with slight more, there is a slight more, one more thing that we need to say. We can derive the basic features of the method of forcing from this presentation. So we know that it's going to add bounded set. This is the P restricted to alpha. We know that no cardinals outside of the critical point are going to be singularized. We know that no cardinal is going to be collapsed. Everything here can be derived from this presentation. There is something here which is much more difficult than in the previous case, which is the intermediate model, M omega, with P restricted to omega, is already an extension of M alpha with P restricted to alpha. It's already a extension of M alpha. This means that we don't have an element embedding from P to this model. It's already more complicated model. If alpha is limit, we won't have an element embedded from this model to any sub-model of the final one. And alpha is successful, we will. So we have less to work in this kind of thing. In particular, we don't know how to pull the previous theorem using we don't know how to get stationary inflation as the successor of a singular from countable finality, starting with the same assumption as before. So the current upper bound for the successor for a stationary selection is, let's say, alpha omega 1 plus 1 is sequence of omega 1 in supercompact cardinals. Extended in Melchior's approach. We don't know how to improve it. And the reason that we don't know how to improve it is exactly because the intersection theorem here is less useful. We are intersecting models which are already quite complicated. Okay. Any questions so far?
Find the sequence by different numbers.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
not the previous slide. So, yeah.
Yeah, there is a typo in the, and it should be omega to the beta 0 and then omega to the beta 1. Not omega 1. So, just the counter number. So when we are doing the iteration at each point, what we're doing is we're looking which is the least index in which we do not meet this measure and boundary below this limit. And now, inductively, you can prove that you are going to meet the beta measure. Let's say you're going to meet it first at the point omega to the beta, the ordinal exponentiation, and later you're going to be able to compute exactly what kind of measure you're going to apply using the Kaplan normal form. Once the length of U is larger, kappa or more, then this change. No longer applicable. Does it make sense? Okay. 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 I'm going to skip this last bit. Maybe I just say it really shortly. You can do the same as already enforcing, slightly more complicated, and at some point, let me say this because this is important, at some point, the intersection theorem fails. I didn't write. Okay. So if we're looking, yes, here it is. If you're looking at the intersection of the M alpha irrespective to alpha, and we are going to take the intersection up to the length of saturation. The length of saturation now is the iteration is always going to terminate, but it's not something easily computable from the length of U. And when O kappa is larger than kappa plus, the intersection is pretty larger than M alpha, when the generic extension that you have before. There is an object missing, and the object which is missing is the assignment telling us for each critical point kappa alpha where it can go, to which measure it corresponds. We can do this as long as O kappa is less than kappa plus, but once O kappa is larger than kappa plus, we cannot do that. And this correspondence exists in the intersection moment. Okay. Yes, yes. I'm going to skip it. And the last thing that I want to say is certainly more of a question. So let's recall Megidor's identity crisis. So Megidor showed the following thing. If we start with a strongly compact cardinal, there is a genetic extension in which this cardinal is the least measurable and it is still strongly compact. How did prove this theorem? We did an iteration of Ricky type forcing or Manila Ricky forcing below kappa. So for each measurable below kappa, he just added a Prickly sequence to this measurable, and he showed that eventually a couple remains strongly compact. And how did he show that? I'm not going to give the proof, you can see it in the slide, but it shows by constructing the measure, the strongly compact measure corresponding to kappa using the principal property. Now, let's try to apply this measure. Let's look at the ultrapower map using this measure and ask what kind of an elementary embedding it leaves. What is Ju restricted to V? Is it definable in V? Is it an iteration of measures in V? Okay. And if it is, which kind of measure? And this is certainly it. So in the proof, what Menachem did is just taking a strongly compact embedding J, apply it to P, and then use the proprietary property in order to derive a measure extending the original one. But certainly, this J does not lift. Because if you just look at J of U, it's embedding from VG to MH, and the M cannot be closed on the omega sequences. Because we are adding frequency sequences between kappa and J. So M itself is some kind of iteration, probably or hopefully. So here is the world conjecture. If we are doing the method for zero or something similar, then we are going to have two things. If we look at this strongly compact measure, if we have, or let's say a measure on ordinal in order to be more precise, that we have in the generic extension, then its restriction to be the member of the product. And the restriction of the map Ju to V is an iteration starting with this very restriction, U intersection V, then adding those omega sequences in the Bukowski-Down boundary. We're going to miss a lot of omega sequences that we need, and we're going to add it by iterating the same measure again and again and again, getting the sequence and adding. Now, as wild as this conjecture looks like, its force part is already known to be true. It was proved by Moti Gizik and his PhD student Eyal Kampfer. And actually, they proved that this conjecture is true for measures on kappa. So normal measures on kappa actually look exactly like that. They are the intersection of the measure of V is a member of V. And when we look at J of U, it's actually an iteration where it's a frequency sequences which are missing or obtained by the Bukowski-Down boundary. And I'm not going to say anything about the proof because I don't have time, but know that there is no anti-large cardinal hypothesis in experience. And this is very difficult when, I mean, typically in order to get such a thing, we had to start with something like, okay, start with V equals K, then you do integration, the same K, any elementary value in the integration and everything works. But this is not the case here. We don't have any model. We don't have canonical linear model for those kind of hypotheses. And yet they managed to get an iteration out of the blue. Which I mean, let me finish with a few questions. Okay. So I'm going to sort of repeat what I did before. So for which type of frequency forcing we can do the procedure that we had before for getting stationary reflection. Is it true for everyone that every frequency forcing that has the Bukowski-Down forcing? And as I said, this is partially answered by the Siegel-Priestley framework. Can we get a lower consistency strength of the stationary reflection success of a singular cardinal of uncountable? This looks like a nice question because if we can do that, it means that we actually manage to extend our framework to the encounter of finality case. Okay, can we attack different questions, like non-stationary reflection questions? This is really a good question also for the sigma predictive framework. Can we, I mean, there are like tons of questions about success of singular cardinals combinatorial principle. The most nice one, in my opinion, is special origin. Please, is it possible to attack those questions using the Bukowski theorem? And the last thing related to the result of Kaplan and Mittag is, okay, you get some really large amount of control over measures in the generic extension, maybe you can improve or for the autoparax. I mean, the autoparax, we hope it to be true in an inner model, but maybe the right way to get the consistency of it is actually to go to a generic extension. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Slides available.
Yes.
The slides are available.
Thanks for this a lot. I have a question about the first part on the stationary reflection. So, well, when I asked this question, what you were talking about, it was sort of, what is this forcing that works? You know, can you kind of retrieve it? And you mentioned this thing about these trees. Can you kind of use that to go the other? I mean, is it possible these trees are sort of coding some new iteration strategy or anything like this?
I don't think so, because you don't have an iteration in this kind of forcing. You actually are doing single forcing without all tree. And looking at the tree themselves, I look at this forcing represented by trees, I wouldn't guess that you get stationary reflection. Like, you look at this forcing and think, why would you do such a thing? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe you could at least cover why the bad stationary set is killed, but other than that, I mean, it looks really mysterious. It is useful to know that it exists. It is useful in order to get the chain condition of it and getting some properties of that. But other than that, it is looking from it from the forcing perspective. It's really doesn't make sense.
I think we're going to end and go to the coffee break. Thank you very much.